3, I think you're going to be good for chapter 4. So chapter 4 is basically all about, you got to start with the Puritans, okay? So what do you guys know about that? Who are the Puritans?
Religious group.
The religious group. Where are they from?
England.
From England, okay. Does anybody know what the goals of the Puritans were?
To establish like those in the land that own land and raise them, raise their families and have their families work on the land. Do that sort of thing.
Yeah, basically. And they wanted to create like this perfect religious society. And we'll see if they were successful. Human beings haven't had a very good time of trying to do that, have we? Trying to create a religious society based on like a theocracy, But the Puritans definitely tried it. And why do we even have Puritans? Well, first of all, you got to look back in the English Reformation. If you guys know your world history, back in Europe there was this thing called the Reformation. Or if you want to say it differently, Reformation. Reformation. And the Reformation was basically a movement against the Catholic Church to reform some of the problems that a lot of folks saw in the Catholic Church. And so what you have is in Europe, kind of in the 14 and 1500s, you have this movement, which isn't just a one-person movement. It's like a lot of different people groups that are pushing for the church to reform itself, or they're pushing to break away from the Catholic Church. Okay? In England, you have basically the English king in 1534 who comes up with this idea that I am going to completely break away from the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is not going to be our church anymore in England. Okay? And this is pretty much done by the English king in order to not only break away from the church, but just to establish kind of an English church. And even today, the English have something called the Anglican Church, which is, Anglican means English. So, why did this happen? Because they wanted to have a little bit more control over their area and didn't want to have to live under the allegiance of the Pope. Okay? Now, a lot of Catholics worldwide that don't subscribe to this, and that's okay, of course, but in England's case, they wanted to break away. A sect of that Reformation group was called the Puritans. And what they were interested in is going not just halfway of making a whole new church, but they wanted to create like a whole new way of life. And at the root word of Puritans is, what's at the root of that? Pure, purify, purification. They wanted to not only just break away from the Church of England, but they also just wanted to purify it. And they wanted to create like a whole new branch of, Christianity. In fact, that's one of the main characteristics, is they were interested in purifying the Church of England of offensive features of Catholicism. If you guys don't know this, what Catholics, and I'm not going to say all Catholics were doing this, but the Catholic Church, if you read your book, what was some things that the Catholic Church was doing that was so bad in the 1500s? What were they doing?
Were they beheading people, or
That's ISIS. No, no, I'm just playing, Ruth. I got your name.
People, or
Well, in Spain, they were kind of doing a little bit of that with the Spanish Inquisition and so on. But I'll tell you what was happening a lot is that the Catholic Church was actually selling what they called indulgences, which was it's like they were selling forgiveness for your sins. Like you could basically buy your way out of sin. Now think about that for a minute. How cool would that be, right? You commit a sin, it's like, what's adultery, like $8,000? Okay, cool. Write a check, I'm forgiven. Just kind of whip it out there. The Patriots cheat, on their way to the Super Bowl. Hey, no problem. Just write a check, you know what I'm saying? It's sorry, I had to throw that in there. No, but the Puritans would say, hey, that's totally wrong. What we're going to do is we're going to create a church that completely is separate and creates a godly way of life that is unlike anything anybody's ever seen before. We're going to try to create something very different. And so, King Charles the First actually comes along a little bit later, and he sees this group as a threat, and he passes all these laws that are anti-Puritan. Like he restricts where they can go, and he basically says, hey, what you guys are doing is dangerous. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to basically outlaw you. Okay? Now, if you're a Puritan at this point, you're like, now what gives? We've just broken away from the Pope here, and we want to create like a little bit more religious freedom. Why are you doing this? Why are you sweating this? And so basically, what the Puritans have to do is throughout England is they have to just run around and migrate to avoid persecution. They got to get out of the country or move to different places in the country. Okay. Now, the occasion comes along for them to have their chance to maybe go to the New World. Okay, some things come together for them. Of course, you guys know the story because you were all taught it in elementary school. What's the name of the ship that takes the pilgrims over across the Atlantic Ocean? It's called the Mayflower. April showers bring Mayflowers, and Mayflowers bring pilgrims. Okay. So, they form a colony. Now, just to give you an idea, this map right here just kind of shows you where Puritans are going, where they kind of come from. The darker areas are kind of Puritan strongholds and stuff. But once they get the chance to come to the New World, this is going to be really good for them. They're going to set up what you call the Plymouth colony. Now, they originally thought, this is really crazy, but they originally thought that they were going to end up in Virginia. Now, let's just say the Pilgrims weren't that good of navigators or seafarers. So what ends up happening is they end up going almost, I don't know how many miles above, but up to what is present-day Massachusetts. So these are a bunch of separatists traveling to America. We've got about 102 pilgrims on this Mayflower. And now the crazy thing is, they're not in Virginia, where they're supposed to be, which is what the king says. That's the one colony really that the English have, right? It's the one colony they have. So they end up like all the way up. And then the question is, wow, what are we going to do about this? Because there's nobody around. The only people around are Native Americans. And what are we going to do about that? There's no English for miles, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles. So what they end up having to do is they have to actually draw up a government on the spot, okay? And that government is called the Mayflower Compact. And the Mayflower Compact was signed on November 11th, 1620 by 41 of the colonists. It's the first legal government of this colony, okay? Um, and that's like kind of what I was saying. I'm sorry, I'm tripping over myself here, but because they landed so far north, they simply had to develop this law and this sort of mini constitutions, and that's exactly what they do. Now, if you're the king of England here, and you said that they can go, and they totally missed the boat, so to speak. It's kind of interesting. Like, what's the future going to look like? How are you going to create like a new colony from nothing? And that's going to be the challenge. But that's exactly what's going to happen. So, as you can guess, what do you think, based on previous experience for the English? Do you think that the English colonists would have a easier time setting up shop here in Plymouth, or a more difficult time, perhaps? What do you guys think, based on previous experience the English had? Depends on what time of year it was, huh? So, explain more. What do you mean?
Like if it's winter, or like from November to the end of February, it'd be colder, or if it was more spring, summer, it'd be warmer and more like that.
Sure. And the question is going to be, can they survive at least like one winter? I would say, in terms of when you compare this to what happened in Jamestown, this is sort of a success, although the numbers would lie to you there. The early years in Plymouth were pretty bad. We know that almost one half of the colonists died, and they were rescued by the indigenous tribe called the Wampanoag tribe. Does this sound familiar to what happened in Jamestown? It should, because that's exactly the same thing that happened. So, and this is where you get the first Thanksgiving stories and all this kind of stuff. And the relationship with the Native Americans was, again, kind of off and on. There's stories of the Native Americans treating the colonists very well, and other times where the colonists would fight the Native Americans. So, it kind of just, it was a varied type of thing. And, you can't put a blanket on it, you know what I mean? Like, you can't just say that there was one way that the colonists dealt with Native Americans, or vice versa. Anyways, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, here's a picture of the Mayflower Compact. Now, you guys should write all that down. No, I'm just kidding. I don't even know what it said. No, I do. But it's basically like their form of government, and kind of who's going to make the decisions, who's going to make the laws, all this kind of stuff. It's not elaborate like the Constitution, but anyways, it's there so you can be ooh and ah over it. This is kind of interesting. The Plymouth colony, they were interested in really setting up a whole society, and they set up schools and stuff. And this is kind of crazy. This is actually a textbook. One of the first textbooks in the New World that was used for the education of young people. It's pretty cool. It's called the New England Primer. And it basically has all these stories and stuff. You guys remember in elementary school, if you remember anything in elementary school, how there was like a ton of like little stories that you would read and then answer the questions at the back of the book and stuff? Well, the Puritans actually came up with their own textbook where kids could actually read everything, and then, So they really were one of the first colonies to, I guess, the first colony to start a really big educational kind of endeavor. The Plymouth plantation kind of looked like that. That's actually a picture of it under winter. It's a National Historic Site where you can go and check it out if you so choose. It's pretty cool. Of course, you guys know we've already talked about the first Thanksgiving and the relationship with the Native Americans. And we've talked about, there's conflicting accounts of what actually happened at the first Thanksgiving. Did the first Thanksgiving actually happen the way that we think it happened, or that my kids thought it happened? Probably not.